And welcome back on Take Action News with David Shuster. Of course, Daniel Marin's guest hosting once again this week, Saturday, June 22nd, 2013. It seems the protest movements that we've seen take place in many major cities in emerging middle-class countries around the world have now spread to Brazil, a country that is hosting the 2014 Soccer World Cup and, of course, the 2016 Olympics in Rio de Janeiro. Joining me now to discuss this social unrest protest movement is Dave Zirin. He's the sports editor at The Nation and a favorite guest, I should say, on Take Action News. Dave, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, hey, great to be here, Dan. Thanks for having me.
Dave, what is going on in Brazil right now? We saw over 1 million people on the streets in that country, some of the biggest protests in perhaps decades.
I mean, starting point is just for listeners to get a framework in their minds that Brazil is a country that's larger than the continental United States. It's got 200 million people. And while these protests are nationwide, they have different character in each city. So it's hard to talk about a Brazil protest movement because the protests themselves have become kind of a catch-all for everything under the sun, a catch-all for frustration at poor public services, poor health care, poor education, and the fact that billions of dollars are going to the World Cup and the Olympics while people have these real concerns. Now, in different cities, it takes on different political characters. In some cities, the right wing of Brazil are attempting to use it as a way to return to prominence and relevance after really decades in the dark. In other cities, it's got a much different kind of character to it. But the one thing that binds them all is this idea of people saying, you know what, we have felt shut out for too long. We're now going to step up and have our voices be heard.
One of the most interesting things that you reported on is that the famous Brazilian soccer star Pele of years past has essentially said, go home, and thrown in his lot with the establishment. What do you make of that?
Well, and then he had to backtrack on that, too. I mean, first of all, Pele throwing in his lot with the establishment, that shouldn't be surprising. I mean, he's somebody who for decades has never failed to take money to stand with a dictator if that's what it took. Or, I mean, they even parodied that on The Simpsons in the 1990s. If you might remember their soccer episode of, like, I hereby show up to endorse this product, and they hand him just a bag of money with a dollar sign on it. So that's less surprising. What is far more surprising, and it says something so much about our media culture in the 21st century, that Pele got a lot of crap for it. And he didn't just get crap. I mean, it was social media. Some person, like the quote that I like so much is one person who said, if Pele is the king, because people call him the king because of soccer, his soccer skills, if Pele is the king, then just call me a Jacobin. Which, if you know anything about the French Revolution, that's pretty harsh.
That basically is like, I want to kill Pele, in a way. I mean,
off with his head, saying off with, basically. I don't think this person actually meant physical harm to Pele, but it's just making the point that, no, we're not going to accept the same old crap. But because of social media and the kind of outrage that it provoked on social media, Pele backtracked and said, no, I stand with the protesters as long as they're not violent, which is not dissimilar from what's now become the kind of mainstream line in Brazilian politics. And it should sound very familiar to people in the United States who've been part of protest movements. You know, focus on the small minority of people who have like broken windows. Don't focus at all on police violence and the gassing of protesters. I mean, I know someone who lost a finger in Rio 2 nights ago because one of the glass canisters exploded right at their feet, these gas bombs they're shooting into the crowd. So no mention of that by Pele, no mention of that by the Workers' Party, the ruling party of Brazil, but a lot of mention of, we hear you, now please don't blame soccer for this.
Dave, you compared this to some of the unrest back in 1968 in Mexico City. What are some of the similarities? What are the differences? And for folks who particularly don't remember that era.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, before the 1968 Olympics in Mexico City, there had been a protest movement in the streets made up of thousands of workers and students, and hundreds of them were killed the week before the opening of the Olympic Games in what's known as the massacre of Tlatelolco Square, and in the Plaza de las Tres Culturas in Mexico City. Really one of the most horrific slaughters that we've seen over the last 50 years in the Western Hemisphere was right before the Olympics. And the main similarity, there are two really critical similarities between Mexico City 68 and Brazil today. The first is that the spine of the protesters in Mexico City, like in Brazil, they're often referred to as students, as if that means they're middle class.
Dave, unfortunately, I got to wrap it up mid-thought. I'm sorry we had you for such a short period, but here we're going to keep following your stuff, and I recommend everyone read Dave Zirin, Edge of Sports on Twitter for more information on this. Dave, thanks so much for joining us.
No worries, Dan.